Okay, hello everyone. We're here at GauntletCon 2019. This is my first time actually taking part on GauntletCon. I'm very excited, and I'm also very excited to be here with these wonderful people. We're gonna talk about non-Western, non-Eurocentric fantasy and tabletop role-playing games. So I have more than anything, I have questions. So, but let's talk about it and see what points we can touch and discuss. So let's have everybody present themselves. Who wants to start?
I can, since you can go through my alphabetically. I'm Misha. I am one of the three principals of New Agenda Publishing. We are kickstarting our game Maroon this month, which is a Afrocentric space opera. I've also done work with More Seats at the Table, which is a newsletter that highlights games from women and non-binary creators. And I was the editor for #Feminism.
Cool. And I'm Agatha Cheng. I am co-host of Asians Represent, which is a podcast on the One Shot Network celebrating Asian creators within the what's the word for it? Analog gaming community. We do interviews, and then we also just talk about topics about diversity and other things related to that.
Awesome.
And I'm Lowell Francis, and I run for the Gauntlet. I'm co-host of the main Gauntlet podcast, and I'm kind of on here, I think, because I've done a lot of work on looking at the history of different RPG genres and kind of tracing the different publication things. Not as in depth as, say, Designers and Dragons, but I like looking at how those things evolve.
Nice. And my name is Miguel Espinoza. You can call me Mike. I'm from Mexico. I'm working in my first game, which is a PBTA game set in Mexico, and it's called Lowell. It will be starting next week, actually. So I hope things go well, or nervous, but anyways. Okay, so as I said before, I mainly have like questions, and all these, the suggestion of this panel came out from how I've seen, at least from my side, from my perspective, this like the pre-Hispanic cultures, the pre-Columbian cultures, that the Aztec and Mayans and all that, first of all merged together into one weird thing, and then usually when I saw them in games, they are either like monstrous, like lizard folk or serpent people or things like that, and or brutally and savage, and they are usually kind of like the enemies, and I said, well, why is that? Why it is the only way that they can be portrayed and all that stuff? So I have been wondering about those topics, and I have like those questions. Obviously, one of my first thoughts was, yeah, well, we all kind of like come from Tolkien, and I mean, I like the books. I am a fan of the work, but that's not all that it is in the world. I mean, like, I would like to see some different stuff. Like, for example, when I read Ursula K. Le Guin books of Earthsea, that was like very refreshing for me. Like, oh, this is great. This is another different kind of still some close to the same thing, but different, very, very different. So yeah, that's the reason I proposed this panel. Like why. Like, what can be done? Why are we doing? What has been done? What are we doing? And what options are there? What do you think about it? Also, like,
I always come back to the fantasy world that most people think of is a Europe that never actually existed.
Right.
So it's much whiter, it's much more male, it's much different than how Europe actually was during the time period. So I always find it odd when people say things like, oh, well, you know, you're putting in black people, or you're putting in Asian people, or you're putting in more women. It's like, and it's you're making it in ahistorical, or it's not historically correct. And I'm like, but it is historically correct. No, really, I have sources. Have you heard of medieval POC? Because she pretty regularly kind of shows you, hey, look at all this art that's been around for centuries that has people of color all throughout it. It's not as pale as you keep saying it is. So that's my first thought. It's like, you adding other cultures, adding other people, adding people who aren't white to even a European model is not unheard of. One of the guys at our Renfest, they have a ninja that helps with the act, and he has a whole spiel about how, you know, no, really, ninjas existed. They were about the same time period. So a ninja in the middle in the Renaissance fair is not really inaccurate so much as geographically improbable. So there's all kinds of things you can do with just, if you are going to draw on Europe, draw on the real Europe. Don't draw on like this weird fantasy Europe that doesn't actually exist, where, you know, there were no brown people ever.
Yeah, I guess, like, in terms of the lack of I don't know, diverse settings in RPGs is one of the reasons why you can't play them, because they don't exist. So this is like, I'm calling people out, creators, make more settings set in, like, I don't know, just, yeah, something that's not as like Eurocentric and not as Tolkien inspired, because like all these local histories and cultures have existed, you know, it's not a blank page, but it's just sometimes it's harder to, I guess, access in English, maybe, or even in, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of not true as well. Or I guess, okay, I'm like, not just English, but like in like the West, I guess. But they exist, and people of different cultures also are living here as well. And so I think it's very exciting to me right now, because I feel like there's a lot more material that's like coming up now that people are writing, and, you know, like even like with yours, Miguel, just like all this stuff that's like, we're going to hit you with that fantasy as well, but it's not in the setting that you're used to. And so this, I think, is a good moment for us to talk about this and how, like, what are these different settings?
So I'll mention a little thing that struck me the other day on this, is how it's reinforced in like really like little subtle ways in things. I love 13th Age. I think it's a great fantasy RPG, but I'm reading through some of the modules, and all of the names are incredibly white, or incredibly white versions of elf names, like White Rose and Stoneharm, and they all, there's that sound and that language and what they're using in terms of that sort of very Tolkien-y thing that just kind of keeps reinforcing it. That keeps, it doesn't add new sounds, it doesn't add new ideas, doesn't add images. I mean, it's classic, but it's not taking us anywhere. It's actually one of the things that I love about Arun, Misha's project, is nothing. You can tell from the sound of the language, from the names, from the appearance, it's not a standard, you know, retemplate of Traveler or something like that.
Yeah, we were pretty careful not to put any humans in at all, just to get away from it completely. Because if you just scrap humanity and start all over, what would you do differently? It's like, all right, well, we don't have any humans, so okay, we don't have to worry about some of those tropes and okay, well, these are the elf people. They're kind of like humans, but with pointy ears. It's like, okay, well, yeah, no, we don't. We just got bugs and plants and stuff instead. And that was more interesting.
Cool, nice. Yeah, and okay, so that's one thing, no? The type of fantasies that looks into the historic Europe, as you were mentioning, but what about the present day fantasies? Like, I also like, for example, again, this, and I mean, this is like maybe just my perception. Like, for example, when I first started playing, it was like D&D, and then came Vampire, and then I was like, oh, cool. And I'm from Vampire. Then I was like, started to check the material and all that, and then I said like, oh, there's Mexico in it. But then, yeah, but they are the weird, crazy things, Sabati guys, like, and again, it is again this savage thing. Let's put it there. And what other like things have you seen in present day like fantasy? Like, there is now not that question of but that was not historically accurate and all that, but here and now in present day, is there any other? I mean, that's kind of the only example I can think of right now out the top of my head. Also, there was this whole thing they did with the supplements for Asian World of Darkness.
Kindred of the East.
Yes.
Wait, sorry, what is this?
Kindred of the East. It was the extension to Vampire set in Asia. It was an interesting, let's just say that's a good word, interesting step into diversity. It's about 20 years old, I guess, at this point now. Okay. And I'm hoping they've learned from that.
Interesting.
It was not the best representation ever. I mean, they were trying. They were trying really hard in some areas, but it kind of completely missed the mark in a lot of others.
Okay, I just Googled it.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was they had another, I mean, and then like the whole Assamites and the Ravnos and some of the clans were just, hey, really, you really want to make that stereotype? Are you sure, honey? Are you positive that's what you want to do? And Werewolf, as much as I loved playing it, it is just like trope after trope after trope after stereotype after stereotype after stereotype. Right. I've yet to meet anybody who can play a Fianna without trying to put on a fake Irish accent. And so there's lots of times they've tried. And there's lots of missteps. And I know that the current edition, they are working towards correcting a lot of that.
The current edition of
Vampire World of Darkness in general. So Vampire, Werewolf, all of this, especially Vampire. Right. I think that is where they're starting with for V5. Is correcting some of that, and I was talking over the last weekend, with a couple of people who are working on it, and they were like consulting with Native Americans. They were consulting with other cultures, people from other cultures, to say, hey, we know we goofed up before. Can you tell me if I'm still goofing up? Is this better?
That's a really good call. Yeah.
And that's as much as we say often, don't just go and ask your black friend for an opinion. But sometimes asking your black friend or your native friend or your Hispanic friend for an opinion is what you need to do. But more than just asking them, offering them to compensate them. This is emotional labor. You're asking them to do something for you, and you're going to turn around and make money off of it. They should get compensated fairly for that.
Yeah. I mean, if we want to go into like calling out games for problematic content, we would be here all day, all night, going all to midnight tomorrow, and that's gonna keep going on. Yeah. So, and I think it's good to like mention some stuff, to be like, hey, BT dubs, remember how this is problematic? It's still problematic. But also, like, I totally agree. Like, it's okay to like want to write stuff. Again, that's what we were talking about. Like there's not enough content set in like other fantasy settings. So it's good that people are still trying to create them, but just get cultural consultants, get people to do sensitivity readings for you. And if you are solid, and like sometimes you even after that, you're still going to get called out for stuff. And just, I think being okay with that and like owning to it is also very important. That shows a really good, like, I think that shows like your stance about like whether you're legit in your desire to portray things respectfully or not. Is if people are like, yo, this like is totes racist, and you're like, sorry, I acknowledge that, then it's like, that's good.
Yes.
It's great. And then we can move on. So I'm really excited about that. I've never played vampire or anything in like the White Wolf milieu. So I'm not familiar with it, but I'm glad that this is happening. Yeah, and I guess we could I don't know if Miguel, you had something else in mind. I'm also like trying to think of like what are games that like if someone is watching this and is like, okay, so like what are some of these settings? What are some of these games that I can play if I don't want to play a Tolkien-esque fantasy? Like, do we have some? We want to toss it into the...
Yeah, I also had that kind of like that question, like, okay, who is doing things right, or who is close to doing things right? Like as like that you mentioned, at least getting consultants and caring about these issues. Like again, I only have questions. Like I just recently also found out about Orun. Like I totally like when I saw it, like, oh, this is super cool. Like a non-Eurocentric, like different and refreshing. So, and do you have other examples?
7C is actually doing some really cool things with other cultures. I know that they've hired people from those cultures to actually help write them, which is it's a good thing. Trying to think who else.
Well, and I want to lean into what you just said, like the Crescent Empire supplement for 7th Sea, and how it treats sort of both Arab and Islamic cultural elements is freaking brilliant. It's well done. It doesn't present those cultures as a monolithic. It presents a variety of them, including what I would say sort of a Jewish source inspired culture within that. The cultures, aren't the other. They're presented as, hey, you're going to play from these places, and then maybe you're going to integrate it into the game, as opposed to, oh, here's the source book of the outsider place that maybe you can make a weird character from. And my background's a little bit in Middle Eastern studies, and as I read through, I could see lots of great stuff. I mean, just smart use of historical details and reincorporating it and bringing the fantasy to it in a way that was respectful and interesting and made you want to play in it. Not just there, but exciting and as compelling as the European stuff.
Yeah, I was talking to you're right, there is a kind of like fantasy Jewish land, and I was talking to Shoshana. She did her version of fantasy Israel for 7th Seas, and she was so excited to have gotten to put that in and make it so that this is what she would want what she would want to have seen when she was a kid growing up and looking for somebody from her culture to play in a game. And I think that's what the biggest thing is we all kind of want to play someone like ourselves a lot of the times, even if somebody completely different from ourselves. And if we don't have those different options, it's kind of hard to do. So being able to find somebody who's like yourself in a game is super important. Trying to think what other good examples are.
We talked about this on Asians Represent, but there's a game called A Single Moment, and it's by Toby Abad. It's a 2-person game, and it's where you play like two. It's based on like a lot of samurai movies, where it's like there's like a lot of build up and a lot of dramatic moments, and in the end, it ends with this climactic battle, which actually ends very quickly and usually with someone dead. And then it's just, but then you're basically playing out like what is their love-hate relationship leading up to this point, and like what's happened. And there's some, I remember reading it, and I'm not Japanese, first of all, so I can't say like, oh yeah, being a Japanese person, this for sure legit. But I can you can tell when people put research into things. The consumer is a lot more informed than sometimes are given the credit for. So I was reading it and I was like, oh wow, like the research into like the Bushido and then like different aspects of it. And also just like a lot of the things that it's like cultural assumptions about life, like kind of values that are kind of integrated into even just the text, like the way that like something is presented, like an event or like a relationship to your family member is presented. I was like, oh, okay, like I can really buy into this. And I know that there was a lot of research done. And I feel like that is a really good example of writing about not your own culture, but done well as well, because Toby is also not Japanese.
So Lowell posted for us a viewer comment there. So it says, I think systems that allow open-ended world building and character generation helps deter some Eurocentric tropes. What do you think?
Yes and no. If your players are likely to go away from Eurocentric tropes to start with, absolutely. If your players are not comfortable going away from those tropes, having open-ended world building just is going to reinforce those tropes. If there is kind of a middle ground where, and Urban Shadows is a good example of this. Let's take your character sheet and put what most people would choose as the default option, but make that last. So, like, if you're looking at the ethnicities on an Urban Shadows character sheet, white is always last. So you start with Asian, you start with Black, and then you finally get to white. And so you read through all these other interesting options before you get to what you would normally just start with. Whereas, so that it's a subtle thing, but it makes you think about something other than just, okay, I'm going to play, a straight white dude. So if you want to keep it open-ended world building gets you away from Eurocentric tropes, but just open-ended doesn't necessarily do it by itself.
Yeah, we just did a microscope session for a campaign world, and it came out white as fuck. And so when I went through as a GM and was like adding in additional material and stuff, I made sure that I was going and getting different sounding names and getting different kinds of approaches and words and language, adding it into the mix so that once they saw the full history and once we started to play, we can get things that maybe are a little bit less just that sort of Tolkien model on the table. And there's some other tricks I think GMs can do to provide that, especially if you give like example names, like you and any of that material that you have as models, that's going to shape that so heavily. I think Urban Jazz is a great example of that. You're right.
Yeah, another thing I do when I'm running or even playing is I have a couple of Pinterest boards full of just different character avatars so that you have just different faces that I found interesting. A lot of them are Black. Most of them are women. But if you throw this out there, it's like, oh, hey, I didn't think of doing that. Or if you print out a bunch and you put them on get them printed out on you can order a deck of drive-through cards from RPGs, or just even printing them out on in color on index cards, or send them to have a bunch of photos printed at your local Costco or CVS or whatever with just diverse character portraits you found. You know, and then when it's like, oh, this is your contact, just drop a picture, and if it's not a white guy, hey, that's a plus. You know, it's easy to just throw those kinds of things in there so that it is just kind of mixing it up as you go along.
That's brilliant. Yeah, these are really cool. About like if you don't have the setting, the resource like in a setting or in a game, then how do you diversify your game? Yeah.
And go if you have a collection of photos like I did for Urban Shadows and for the fantasy game, like Misha was saying, I went back and I went, let's take out all the white people and let's see what happens, and not use any of them for the character images and stuff. Yeah, and that's what I've done for the last several campaigns, and I think it's created more interesting visuals, and nobody said anything, and I kind of love that.
I guess you can't really say anything either. That would reflect really terribly.
When do we get to see a white dude, Lowell?
Well, I guess I can see someone saying
that. Yeah, maybe.
Nobody that I play with regularly, at least, but I can see it happening.
Yeah. Ain't nobody gonna say it to my face, but I can see it happening at other tables.
Okay, so there was also this other thing in our notes that these questions I found interesting that you Agatha put there, that and it has to do with this thing that I was mentioning about my point of view. Like I have a particular point of view because I'm from Mexico, and but maybe like for that I can like easily see those things I mentioned, but. You put the question you put there is that what makes a setting problematic, or what are the signals for problematic content that we can look for? And that's interesting because for me, being Mexican, I can easily detect the stuff that relates like to Mexico and its cultures, but for other cultures, it will be harder because I am also like immersed in this like pop culture of movies and all that stuff. So that's a very, very interesting question. What do you all think?
Oh, well, I have an answer to that, which is in episode 1 of Asians Represent, where we talked about Orientalism and specifically like what is problematic or what makes something problematic. But it's I think anything that makes, I mean, there's so many papers written on this already, but like anything that makes people into something that you can't connect with on a person-to-person level anymore, where they become the other, then that's when it becomes problematic. There are of course shades of gray and everything, but it's like, for example, like if this person let's say is a ninja, and they let's say they talk with an accent and everyone else at the table does not speak with that accent. Immediately, they're not someone that you relate to anymore, because you're like, oh, there's someone, and you have associations with people who speak with an accent that's different than yours. Especially, let's say, if everyone is English speaking and this is someone who's speaking English with an accent, then you think, oh, they're like, maybe they're like struggling with certain things, like they're a new immigrant or whatever, and they're not me, because that's not my life. That's already putting them at a distance. So, or you're putting your character from further of a distance from yourself. So it really depends on, but that doesn't mean that you can't speak with accents, you know? Like, for example, if I'm playing with a table of all, let's say, all Mandarin speaking and English speaking people, so they're all bilingual. If one of us starts using like some kind of Chinese accent that, say, like my mom has, like that's a really different vibe, you know? Like that's like you're tapping into a very different experience than if I was playing with a table of not all Chinese people and one of them taps into the same accent that my mom has. So I think anything that makes someone feels like an other is problematic. There are of course certain tropes that you just shouldn't do. And there are lists of them on the internet. There are articles of those on the internet. It's not hard to Google. So
Yeah, and I'd go a step further. If you are playing a stereotype as opposed to a person, you veered into problematic territory. You know, not all black people speak jive. Not all Hispanic people have an accent. Not all, anytime I have to add not all blank, you've veered into problematic territory. My mother would have killed me if I had come into the house speaking jive. So it's a very odd thing when someone is sitting at a table and they decide to put on an accent or put on a weird kind of vibe to it. Whereas if you just start by, all right, this is a person who happens to be blank. And if you start from there, usually you're doing a better job at doing a diversity than if you start with, oh, well, Asian people talk like this, so I'm going to talk like this. Or, Hispanic people do this kind of thing, so I'm going to do this. Or, black people do this, so I'm going to do this. So if you start from, hey, this is just a person who happens to be blank, you usually are going to do a better job than if otherwise. By that same token, do a little research. I mean, like Agatha said, I mean, Google is easy, and for a lot of new players, Google is older than they are. So there is no reason for them not to know what Google is. And yeah, you'll find some stuff that's crap, but you'll find some good stuff too. TV Tropes is a great resource. The Feminism Wiki is a good resource if you're looking for resources on feminism. There's how to write people of color, I think, on Tumblr is the Tumblr one, and it's got like a list of articles like, hey, don't do this, do like little things like, hey, let's not use food to describe somebody's skin tone, because there's a lot of racist connotations there, and makeup companies are really bad at this. I have been cocoa or mocha in more makeup shades than I care to ever be, but little things like that. How to, like I said, I think it's how to write people of color or how to write color or something. I'll find it before the end of the episode. Little things like that. You can look it up. It's not hard. It's easy to find.
Yeah, I will add I guess an exception to this, or it's not really an exception to the rule, but it's more that if you're already okay, I'm hitting all those things, we're all being respectful at the table. Sometimes it kind of veers into a different end where it's everyone is just solid on point, playing everyone just like some average person and not treating any specific cultural background differently, where it becomes a little vanilla, where it's almost like everyone is being played as white. Which is, I understand the effort, and that's not always an issue. It's a good starting off point. But I think sometimes, once you've already established all of that, once you've gone on Tumblr or whatever, or everyone at the table just kind of gets it, if you want to be oh, I want to talk about this issue, or I want to talk about a specific aspect of an experience that is about this culture, then you can bring it to the table. And if everyone is okay and comfortable with it, then you can try to play that out as well, because that is also oftentimes a part of, people's experiences, as part of different cultural backgrounds. As long as everyone is on the same page with how we're exploring it, we're not exploring it for the stereotype, but we're exploring what is it like to live in this with this kind of circumstance or whatever, then I think that is also very valuable. I mean, that's kind of it takes a lot more from the table than just a normal game, but if everyone is up for it, that's actually really valuable.
I got a follow-up question to what you both have mentioned. Your comments are from the perspective of the players, the players portraying characters or doing accents and all that. So my follow-up question would be, how much will that be responsibility of the writer of the system or the designer of the game than rather the players? How to measure that, or how to how can a writer or game designer, like help those kind of situations, like not enforce, because it may be a very strong word, but guide or help with that issue.
I think one of the easiest ways is just say it in your text. It's like, hey, this is a game about blank. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. We're going to be respectful of people. We're going to, and then in a lot of games nowadays have a bibliography or a ludography, something of like, these are things that inspired me when I was doing it. Put some sources in there that aren't standard, white guy tropes or standard white guy movies. If you're going to put in a John Wick, put in a Atomic Blonde, put in a Man on Fire, put in, there's ways of bringing in other things that are fairly easy to do, just if your intention is it, make sure your intention comes through. And the easiest way to make sure your intention comes through is to just say it.
Yeah, I don't think, I think that's totally great. It's like, also, like, if someone sees that in the book, they're like, oh, I know what this is about, and it's, so you're not like trying to sneak in diversity. I don't know. I don't think that's necessary. So yeah, I totally agree. Just be straight up with it. Like we're talking about this culture. Let's not do these stereotypes.
Cool. And there's another comment that from another viewer, but I must confess, my English is failing me here, so I don't understand the comment completely.
Somebody's asking where do you go to find sensitivity readers in languages other than English? I went to Twitter, and just like when we did a rune, a lot of our names for things are chosen from Yoruba and Igbo, which we don't speak fluently. So I just put out a call. Hey, I'm looking for a fluent speaker of Yoruba who can look over some of our stuff and tell me if I'm screwing it up. We were trying to avoid, the Lone Ranger sidekick is Tonto. Tonto means stupid in Spanish. We don't want to make that mistake, little things like that. So just, I put out a call on Twitter and it got shared a few times and somebody pinged me. It's like, hey, yeah, sure. I'm fluent. I can do that for you. And just make sure you pay them when you do that.
Yeah, and Philip is from Germany, and I think for him there's also a challenge of a second language in that sense. But I think going on Twitter, that's a good way around that, because it is, people are using that across different languages and so on.
Yeah, I think because I see that in the question, it's like where RPGs are not as common. So then finding people who are a part of that culture to like do sensitivity reading for you would be very difficult. And I don't think you need to limit yourself to people who play RPGs.
Yeah, absolutely not. Because people are people. I mean, just because they don't know, like, I still have to successfully explain what an RPG is to my parents, but that doesn't mean my parents can't read my book and say, okay, yeah, this is weird. For something that's off, especially in something like a background setting or a setting piece. Settings are more than are just a part of the game. They don't need to understand how the mechanics work to make it to be able to read to see if you're making a cultural mistake.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. Okay, so here in our notes, we also have like.
Oh yeah, so I found the Tumblr is called Writing with Color, and they've got links at the top for stereotypes and tropes navigation, some resources. You can ask questions of them, and it's a good source for like I said, it's lists of hey, these are articles about these topics, and that you can read quickly or easily, and they're compiled in one place. So
Okay, so maybe some of the notes are also we already like went through, like, yeah, for example, other sources, fantasy novels we can use for inspiration that are not Eurocentric. Yeah, we mentioned Google as a source already, but do you have like at the top of the head like very particular examples of that?
If we want to just talk about like fantasy novels, I remember, well, you actually tweeted this list of like fantasy novels. I think it's like, if you like Game of Thrones, then read these ones by these authors of color. I can't find that list right now, but I found another one just by Googling.
Yeah,
10 mind-blowing fantasy books by people of color.
A lot of people are doing nice jobs of rounding those things up as resources. And in the last 5 years, there's so many authors that are getting more attention, that have been around, that have done the work, but now they're finally getting some attention and working in really interesting ways. Some really great stuff out there.
Yeah, like even there's like N.K. Jemisin's the 5th season series, and I think it's getting made right into a series.
I think so. I want to say Amazon's doing it, but I could be wrong about that one.
Yeah, and it's being produced by what's his face? You know, the Song of Ice and Fire dude.
Martin.
Yeah, there you go. Sorry.
No worries.
My memory.
Another one is Inde Okafor. She wrote Akata Witch and Binti, which are amazing. Octavia Butler, of course, with Fledgling, if you want a good vampire that's not necessarily a European vampire. There's what's it called? Dread Nation, which is a alternate history U.S. Where, as the Civil War is about to happen, zombies show up, and so hey, what's this going to do to the world? I'm trying to think who else. There was one that I just saw that's coming out that I really want to read. It's like Mexican vampires, which was like, yeah, right.
Yeah,
I'd recommend for sort of modern horror fantasy in the genre of urban shadow stuff, Cassandra Caw's books, Hammers on Bone and stuff, which are wild. So I don't know if it's that particular one, but there are a number of them. There's sort of noir, Asian weird horror fantasy with gods and things like that. That's really good. And City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty, which is one of a set of people who are doing stuff with really interesting Arab tropes and imagery and stuff. That's very cool.
The one I was thinking of is called Certain Dark Things by Silvia Moreno Garcia.
Yeah, there's also, if you want to do like Japanese fantasy, there's Dragon Sword and Windchild by Noriko Ogiwara. And it's got sick art, I will say that. So, if anything else. And then there's also like, I think it's called the Poppy Wars. Yeah. Which is a Chinese one. And it's by R.F. Kuang. It's a pretty cool one. And it has a female protagonist too. So lots of inspirations.
Yeah. And so as we get close to our like ending time, I would like maybe to pose this is kind of a personal question. What do you think about how do I put this? Like, for example, a game that it's trying to be loud in respect of going against or turning upside down all those tropes, like, okay, now your elves are gonna be the evil ones that comes here and do the blah blah blah. So what do you think about an idea like that or something like that?
I often think the most interesting games are the ones who know what the tropes are and set out to subvert them.
Okay.
Like Monster Hearts, where you're playing the monsters, and it's sort of a metaphor for queerness, but it's also just you're exploring what it means to be a monster in a human world, as opposed to, hey, we're just going to start, oh wait, there's monsters, we're going to kill it. And so anytime you put yourself in a situation of empathy, I find it more interesting than if you're just straight up, oh, hey, look, something's scary, we're going to kill it.
And I'd say that one of the things I'm always worried about when I see some of the stuff that kind of tries to just absolutely flip and go things is the danger of just making things exotic, of distancing and just making the other, that it without the empathy that Misha's talking about, we're not getting any connection there. And I've seen some stuff that does that. Not to point names, so I'm not going to.
I kind of don't get it. Like, what is it, like, just flipping stereotypes on their heads? So then is that what we're talking about? Sorry.
Yeah, and again, I'm sorry for this is a very personal question, but
that's fine.
What I said, for example, at the beginning, I have always been a very particular example. I have always seen like the pre-Hispanic cultures as the monster, as the savage thing, as lizard men, and as like the serpents and all that, and as Lowell said, also like the supplement to the main game. Like you are just a supplement there. Like we can now go into this exotic place, and so what I was like. Honestly, I sometimes felt like, oh, okay, well, what I'm going to do is now you are going to be the exotic ones, you're going to be the evil ones, and you, Europe, are going to be like the thing that is out there that is coming, and or that is bad or evil or savage or monstrous. And now, like, my culture will be like the center of it, kind of like,
right,
in a way, take that kind of way.
I mean, I think you can write it, right? There's nothing really stopping you. That could be very interesting. And I feel like a lot of different things that people write have very specific starting places, but that doesn't mean that they'll end up in that place as well. So even if you're starting with this, like, if anyone who's like a thoughtful creator, then you'll be like, oh, okay, so like they're gonna be terrible, but like, why are they terrible? And then you go into things, and then it could end up being interesting anyway. I mean, it might not, but I think why not?
I'm going to call something out in particular that bugged me, and I don't know. Okay, there was a recent Kickstarter last year for a game called Dragons Conquer America.
Yes.
And while it's going, oh look, the South American, these meso cultures can be the heroes. It also has the conquistadors as heroes in this, and they're working together. And I'm like,
no.
I'm like, F that. No, that's no.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that create that reaction on me also too. Yeah, I mean the very name of the thing, Dragons Conquer America. I mean, like, what? Like, you are making it even worse. You are giving them dragons now. Like
the guns wasn't enough. You gotta give them
like disease and all those things they brought was not enough. And yeah, and I heard some comments like, yeah, but they at least are presenting, and they're the cultures, and they are including it, and you can be either one or the other. And I was like,
for the same reason, I'm not playing Nazis or Confederate characters. I'm not playing conquistadors.
Yeah, there's a couple of LARPs that like one is set in kind of like a early colonial US time, and the way they got around how potentially the whole colonization thing is, hey, there weren't any people here when we got here, which kind of is worse almost, because now you're just gonna erase entire swaths of people. And then there was another where it's like they wanted to do kind of a alternate history world where I don't remember if it was the South. The South didn't win, but it was like something happened, and so there it was like, okay, so you were just basically looking for a thinly veiled excuse to wear Confederate uniforms still. I mean, what's the why are we still doing, you know, it's like, okay, there wasn't slavery, but we still have Civil War, so we can still wear the uniforms. Like, but why is it so important that you have to do that particular thing so much that instead of respecting the humanity of the people around you, that you would rather do that instead? And it's a point of view I don't understand at all. Because it's like, all right, hey, I want to dress up in a Nazi uniform. Why would you want to? Why do you, like? I don't get people who dress up like stormtroopers either. You know, why would you want to be the bad guy?
So maybe I'll amend what I said before. Yes, you can write whatever. This is a little bit different. But like, yes, you can write what you want, but be prepared for people to call you out on panels like these where we're like, WTF? That kind of thing is not acceptable. So, yeah.
Yeah, freedom of speech is not freedom from consequence.
Exactly.
That's right. Cool. So I guess we can start to wrap this up. Any final thoughts or comments that you want to add?
The easiest way to diversify your games is to read diverse authors. You know, watch diverse movies. You know, if you stay in a little bubble of, you know, white dudedom as your heroes, then yeah, you're never gonna get anything that isn't a white dude as your hero.
I would say as a GM, you're always supplying models. You're always modeling for the players what the world's like, what things look like, what they sound like. And sound's really important. Different sounds and things like that. That's where you start. You don't have to be absolutely overt about it. You just do it, and it will improve because of that.
Yeah, sneak in that diversity. You know, sometimes you gotta do it slowly. And I think my final comment is like to publishers. You know, most people were turning to you for like our resources. So if you will hire more diverse people to write more diverse stories, like we're probably still gonna buy them and play them. Like I don't think everyone's gonna be like, oh, gross.
And if they do you really want those people as your customers?
I mean, yeah, maybe you will lose some customers who are like, oh, gross, I only want to wear my Confederate flag. But there will also be other people who are like, damn, that's me. I'm about this, and buy it. Like I would do that, you know, if I were to see it. So, yeah, that's I think that is my final thing. It's like sometimes it also needs to start from the top.
Yeah, I'm piggybacking a little bit in that you just mentioned. I remember reactions from little some playtests that I've been doing. I mean, what I mean is that I haven't done so many playtests here in Mexico because I live in a town that doesn't have a big RPG movement or players, so many players. I will need to move like to Mexico City to do that, and yeah, it's far. So, but the few people with which I have played, I see that reaction and that excitement when I tell them like, yeah, okay, here's the game, this is what it is about, and they like immediately I can see in their eyes like their brains like start like, okay, so I can be this and I can be that, and I can even live in my own town and say that I go to this store. And so the seeing themselves now, instead of what I kind of felt is like, yeah, instead of trying to pretend that I am an elf or a even in Vampire, an American vampire playing in Chicago, like, yeah, I'm a Mexican here in my hometown doing stuff in a fantasy setting, and all that. So like, yeah, it is, and it is like a very gratificating reaction, like to see them getting excited about that. It is very, very good. And also, I have seen also like the other side, like the reactions of people that getting excited also about this thing that they don't know and they want to learn more about from players from US or from Canada that I have also play tested. So yeah, I just say like I won't say take the risk, because I don't think it is a risk to bring these other. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that many people would be excited about it. Like, so yeah, thank you, I guess, for joining and for sharing your thoughts here with me, and also for making efforts to bring diverse cultures into the hobby to all of you. So where can people like find you if they want to find a shout out?
You can find me on Twitter at BG Gameworks. Had to think. Or New Agenda Publishing. .com, and that's for the Kickstarter. You can find the links to there. I was on G Plus, but it's going away.
Yeah, you can find, well, technically it's not me, but so I'm, again, with the Asians Represent podcast. And on Twitter, our handle is AZNS Represent. AZNS. And then or you can email us at AZNSrepresent@oneshotpodcast.com.
And I'm in the Gauntlet all the time. You can watch my videos on there when I run a whole bunch of stuff. I run 3 different games weekly. If you're interested in Orun, I just did a session this last week. You can check that out from the Quick Start. And also I blog weekly at our Gauntlet blog.
Yeah, and also the podcast.
In the podcast, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm at Nawal RPG, is NAHUAL RPG. I will be kickstarting next week, so if you thank you, and I hope things go well.
It'll be fine. You'll do great.
Thanks. So thank you, everybody, and keep having fun with GauntletCon, and see you around.